Terrell Vance stepped out of his black limousine, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the red dust of his old village. After 20 years of building an empire, he stood before a crumbling, weed-covered grave marked with his mother's name. His breath hitched, but as he reached down to clear the dirt, a small, dirty hand reached out first. It was Marcus, a local boy with hollow eyes. He pressed a yellowed, crumpled note into Terrell's trembling palm. "She told me to wait for the man in the big car," the boy whispered. Terrell's fingers went cold as he unfolded the paper. It wasn't an old letter. The ink was fresh. The message was a jagged plea. "They are eating your flesh, Terrell. Don't go to the house." His heart hammered against his ribs. His mother was buried beneath his feet, yet her handwriting was wet on the page. Who was watching him from the shadows of the porch? And why was his family home now a fortress of silence? Terrell Vance stared at the wet ink on the note until the words blurred. His mother had been gone for 20 years. Or so he thought. He had paid for her funeral from across the ocean. He had sent money for the headstone he was now standing over. Every month for 2 decades, a wire transfer left his bank account in New York to this tiny, dusty village. Terrell took a slow, controlled breath, forcing his billionaire mindset to take over. He was a man of logic, not ghosts. He folded the note and tucked it into his silk-lined pocket. He looked at Marcus, but the boy had already vanished into the thick, tall grass. The village hadn't changed, but it felt different. Terrell climbed back into the limousine. To the main house, he told the driver. He needed to see Grady, his cousin. Grady was the one who had called him 20 years ago sobbing, saying Mama Lucille had passed away in her sleep. Grady was the one who had managed Terrell's money to keep the family legacy alive. As the car rolled down the narrow dirt road, Terrell looked out the tinted window. He saw the new community center. It had his name on it. He saw the modern clinic he had funded. People in the village stopped and stared at the shiny black car. They whispered. Some pointed, but no one smiled. The limousine pulled up to a grand estate. It was the most beautiful house in the county, built with Terrell's success. Grady and his wife, Brenda, were already standing on the porch. They wore expensive clothes and bright, welcoming smiles. "Terrell, my brother, you're finally home," Grady shouted, spreading his arms wide. Terrell stepped out, his eyes scanning the porch. Everything looked perfect. The white paint was fresh. The roses were blooming. It was the picture of a stable, wealthy family. Grady hugged him, smelling of expensive cologne. "We've missed you, man. Come in. The feast is ready," Grady said, leading him toward the heavy oak doors. Terrell smiled back, but his hand stayed inside his pocket, gripping the crumpled note. He noticed something. Behind Grady's shoulder, on the second floor, a single window was boarded up with new plywood. And from behind that wood, he heard a faint, rhythmic scratching sound. "What's in that room?" Terrell asked quietly. Grady's smile didn't fade, but his eyes turned cold. Grady didn't blink. He laughed aloud, hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, that. Just some old repairs, Terrell. The termites in this humidity are relentless. Don't worry about the noise. It's just the wind hitting the loose boards." He placed a heavy hand on Terrell's shoulder and steered him inside. The interior of the house was breathtaking. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers. It looked like a palace in the middle of the woods. But the air felt heavy. It smelled too much like bleach, as if someone was trying to scrub away a permanent stain. Brenda hurried over with a silver tray. "You must be starving, Terrell. We prepared all your favorites." She handed him a glass of dark red juice. Her hands were perfectly manicured, but Terrell noticed she was wearing a long-sleeved dress despite the stifling heat. As she reached out, her sleeve slid back just an inch. Terrell saw a deep, fresh purple bruise circling her wrist. She caught him looking and quickly jerked her arm back, hiding it behind her silk fabric. Her smile trembled. "Drink up, Terrell. It's a special family recipe. Terrell raised the glass to his lips, but the scratching sound from upstairs echoed again. It was louder now, desperate. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of fingernails dragging against wood. He set the glass down on a mahogany table without taking a sip. "I think I'll wash up first," Terrell said. "Which way is the guest suite?" Grady's face tightened. "Brenda will show you. But stay on the first floor, cousin. The upstairs is a mess with the renovations. Very dangerous." As Brenda led him down the hallway, she didn't say a word. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. When they reached the door, she leaned in close, her voice a ghost of a whisper, the note. She breathed. "Did you find it?" Before Terrell could answer, the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall slammed open. Grady was standing there, watching them. "Is there a problem?" Grady asked. His voice was smooth, but his hand was gripped tightly around a heavy brass cane he hadn't been carrying a moment ago. Brenda paled and hurried away without looking back. Terrell entered the room and locked the door. He walked straight to the window. In the garden below, he saw Marcus, the little boy from the cemetery. Marcus was pointing at the trash bins behind the house. Lying on top of the garbage was something that made Terrell's blood run cold. It was a faded, blue sun hat, the exact same one his mother was wearing in the last photo she ever sent him. But that hat was supposed to be inside the casket. 20 years ago, Grady had sworn she was buried in it. Terrell looked back at the boarded-up window on the second floor. The scratching had stopped. Now, there was a new sound. Someone was humming a lullaby. A lullaby only his mother knew. The soft, haunting melody floated through the vents, chilling Terrell to the bone. It was the same song Mama Lucille sang to him every night before he left for the city. He wanted to scream her name, but he forced himself to stay silent. He was a billionaire now. He dealt in facts, and the fact was, a dead woman couldn't hum. He walked to the guest bathroom and turned on the gold-plated faucet. The water was steaming hot. He looked at his reflection in the oversized, diamond-cut mirror. On the counter sat a basket of imported soaps and plush Egyptian cotton towels. Everything in this house screamed wealth and luxury. Terrell had sent millions to Grady over the years, believing every cent was going toward his mother's comfort and her eventual final rest. But then, he looked down at the floor near the vanity. There was a small, plastic bowl tucked behind the marble pedestal. It wasn't for a pet. It was filled with stale, hard crusts of bread and a few wilted greens. It looked like scraps for a prisoner. Terrell stepped out of the room and headed toward the kitchen, his leather shoes silent on the expensive rugs. He saw Grady sitting at the head of a long, banquet table, cutting into a thick, bloody steak. Grady wiped his mouth with a silk napkin, his belly stretching the buttons of his designer shirt. "Everything to your liking?" Terrell Grady asked, not looking up. "The luxury of family is priceless, isn't it?" Terrell didn't answer. He walked past the dining room toward the back porch. He saw the servants' quarters, a small, shack-like building that had been converted into a laundry room. Outside, an old woman was scrubbing heavy linens by hand in a rusted metal tub. She was bent double, her spine curved like a bow. She wore rags that were thinner than the napkins on Grady's table. Grady appeared in the doorway, swirling a glass of expensive cognac. "Don't mind the help, Terrell. They're lucky to have a roof over their heads." Terrell watched the old woman's trembling hands. She looked exhausted, her skin ashy and dry. Then, she looked up. For a split second, her eyes met Terrell's. She didn't speak, but she dropped the heavy wet sheet. Beneath the soap suds, Terrell saw her arm. It was covered in the same purple bruises he had seen on Brenda's wrist. The old woman quickly looked away, but she pointed a shaking finger toward the tall grass behind the shack. There, hidden under a pile of dry wood, was a stack of unopened envelopes. Terrell recognized the gold-embossed logo of his own company. Grady's grip tightened on his cognac glass. "Terrell, the dinner is getting cold. Let's go back inside. But Terrell wasn't listening. He saw a shadow move behind the boarded-up window upstairs again, a thin, pale hand pressed against the glass, leaving a smudge of red. "Grady," Terrell said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Why is there blood on the window of your renovated room?" Grady didn't move. The ice in his glass clinked as his hand began to shake. "Blood, Terrell. You're saying things." "It's probably just red primer from the wood treatment." Grady took a step forward, his body blocking the view of the stairs. "The jet lag is getting to you. You need to sit down." But Terrell wasn't listening. The smell of bleach in the house finally made sense. It wasn't for cleaning. It was for covering a scent. He brushed past Grady, his shoulder hitting his cousin hard. "Terrell, get back here," Grady shouted, his voice losing its polished tone. Terrell ignored him. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The expensive carpet felt like it was swallowing his feet. When he reached the second-floor landing, he saw it. The door at the end of the hall. It wasn't just plywood covering the window. The door itself was reinforced with 3 heavy iron deadbolts. From inside the room, the humming stopped. It was replaced by a low, rhythmic thumping thump, thump. Thump like someone was throwing their body against the wood. Terrell grabbed the handle, locked. He pounded on the door. "Who is in there? Open this door." "Terrell, stop it." Grady reached the top of the stairs, breathing heavily. He held a ring of keys in his hand, but he wasn't moving to help. "You're trespassing in my home. I don't care how much money you have. Get away from that door." Terrell turned, his eyes burning. "I paid for every brick in this house, Grady. My money. My mother's memory. Give me the keys." Grady sneered. "Your mother is dead, Terrell. I buried her. You saw the grave. You're losing your mind." At that moment, a small, muffled voice came from behind the door. It was weak. It was cracked from years of silence. "Malik." Terrell froze. Malik was his middle name. A name no one in this village used. No one except Mama Lucille. Terrell didn't wait for the keys. He stepped back and slammed his entire weight against the door. The wood groaned but held. He slammed into it again. On the third hit, the frame splintered. The door swung open. The room was freezing and smelled of stale bread and old paper. A single mattress lay on the floor, and there, sitting in the corner, shrouded in shadows, was a figure. She was thin. Her hair was a wild cloud of white. She looked up, the dim light hitting her face. Terrell's heart stopped. It was her. It was his mother. But as she reached out to him, Terrell saw her eyes. They were clouded over with thick, white cataracts. She was completely blind. "Malik," she whispered, her hand trembling in the air. "Is the man gone? Did the devil finally leave?" Terrell rushed to her, but before he could touch her, he heard a metallic click behind him. He turned around. Grady was standing in the doorway, but he wasn't holding his cane anymore. He was holding a heavy iron bar, and he was closing the door. Before we continue exploring the truth, please like and subscribe to the channel to witness justice being served. Where are you watching from? New York, London, or perhaps South Africa? Let us know in the comments. "You should have stayed in the city, Terrell." Grady said, "Now, I have 2 problems to feed." Terrell felt the cold bite of the iron bar through his vision as Grady slammed the heavy door shut. The click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot in the small, frozen room. Terrell didn't move. He couldn't. His mind was a storm of fire and ice. He looked at the fragile woman trembling on the floor, then back at the locked door. "You're dead," Terrell whispered, his voice cracking. "I saw the funeral photos, Grady. I have the death certificate." He lunged at the door, pulling the handle with a strength born of pure panic. He kicked the wood. He screamed until his throat felt raw. "Grady, open this door. I will ruin you. I will burn this whole town down." From the other side, Grady's voice was muffled but calm. You already did, Terrell. Your money built this cage. Your greed kept you away for 20 years. You made it so easy. Terrell felt a small, bony hand touch his ankle. He flinched, almost falling. Mama Lucille was crawling toward him, her sightless eyes searching for his face. Malik. Is it really you? She whimpered. Her skin felt like dry parchment against his suit. Terrell collapsed to his knees, his expensive jacket dragging in the dirt. He grabbed her hands, his fingers finding the thick, jagged scars on her wrists. Mama, what did they do to you? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell the neighbors? The old woman let out a dry, rattling sob. I tried, Malik. I wrote letters until my fingers bled. I screamed until I lost my voice. But Grady told everyone I had lost my mind. He told them I was dangerous. She pulled him closer, her breath smelling of nothing but stale water. He told me you died in a fire, Malik. He showed me a charred watch and said it was yours. For 20 years, I've been mourning a living son. Terrell's stomach turned. He remembered the watch Grady was wearing on the porch. The gold one he thought was his father's. Suddenly, Mama Lucille's grip tightened. She tilted her head, listening to the floorboards. SHH, or she hissed. The little ones. Is Marcus still alive? Terrell froze. The boy at the cemetery, yes. He gave me your note. Mama Lucille shook her head frantically. No, Malik, not Marcus. The other ones. The one Grady keeps in the cellar. Before Terrell could ask who she was talking about, the lights in the room flickered and died. In the pitch black, Terrell heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. But it wasn't the door to the hallway. It was a small, hidden hatch under the mattress, and something was crawling out. The hatch under the mattress creaked open. A pair of small, thin hands gripped the edge of the floorboards. Terrell scrambled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. A girl, no older than 7, climbed out. She was shivering, her dress torn and covered in coal dust. Is he gone? She whispered, her voice a tiny thread. Mama Lucille reached out, pulling the child into her arms. This is Maya, she breathed. Grady's own daughter. He hides her when the important people come to visit. Terrell felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was a house of horrors built with his own gold. Before he could speak, the heavy iron bolts on the main door slid back. The door swung open, flooding the room with blinding light. Grady wasn't alone. He stood there with the local pastor and 3 of the village elders. They weren't holding weapons. They were holding Bibles and wearing looks of deep pity. Look at him, Grady said, pointing a shaking finger at Terrell. I told you the city changed him. He broke into my home. He's scaring the poor woman I've spent 20 years protecting. Terrell stood up, his suit ruined, his face flushed with rage. Protecting Grady. This is my mother. You told me she was dead. And this girl. Why is she in a hole in the floor? The pastor stepped forward, his voice soft and patronizing. Terrell's son. We know it's hard to accept the loss. Grady has been a pillar of this community. He's used your donations to feed us all. But your mother. She passed years ago. This poor woman is just a distant relative Grady took in out of charity. She's confused. She thinks everyone is her son. The elders nodded, murmuring in agreement. They looked at Terrell as if he were a madman. Malik, tell them, Terrell yelled, turning to his mother. But Mama Lucille stayed silent. She sat on the mattress, her head bowed, clutching Maya tightly. She didn't say a word. She didn't look up. Grady smirked a quick, cruel flash of teeth. She needs her medication, Terrell. You're overstimulating her, please. For her sake, come downstairs before the sheriff arrives. As Terrell was led out of the room, he saw Brenda standing at the end of the hall. She was crying silently. She looked at the pastor, then at Terrell, and mouthed 2 words. The basement. Terrell looked back at Grady. If the pastor was on Grady's side, and the village believed he was a hero, who was really buried in that grave at the cemetery? Terrell let the pastor lead him down the stairs. His legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. He looked at Grady, who was walking ahead, wiping fake tears from his face with a silk handkerchief. Every step Terrell took felt like a betrayal. Why didn't his mother speak up? Why did she shrink away when he called her name? They reached the grand living room. The elders sat on the leather sofa, their faces grim. Grady sat at his mahogany desk and pulled out a thick folder. He tossed a stack of yellowed papers onto the table. "I didn't want to show you this, Terrell," Grady said, his voice trembling with a staged hurt. "But you forced my hand." Terrell picked up the first paper. It was a psychiatric report from 15 years ago. It had his mother's name at the top. The words severe dementia and violent tendencies were circled in red ink. Below it was a funeral bill, paid in full, with a death certificate signed by the old town doctor. "She died in the hospital, Terrell," the pastor whispered. "The woman upstairs. She's a poor soul Grady found wandering the interstate 10 years ago. She looks like Lucille, yes, but she is not your mother. Grady kept her hidden to protect the town, and to protect your heart." Terrell felt the world tilt. He looked at the handwriting on the note Marcus had given him. He pulled it from his pocket and compared it to the medical records. They didn't match. The note was shaky, jagged. The records were clean. "You've been gone too long, Terrell," Grady added, leaning back. "You wanted so badly to find her alive that you let a stranger trick you. That little girl, Maya, she's the woman's granddaughter. They are both mentally ill. I've been using your money to pay for their nurses and their silence. I didn't want you to feel the shame of a failed legacy." Terrell sank into a chair. The anger in his chest turned into a cold, hollow weight. He felt like a fool. He had spent millions on a lie. He had turned a billionaire's logic into a child's hope, and it had blown up in his face. "I'm sorry," Terrell muttered, his head in his hands. I thought." Grady stood up and patted Terrell's back. "It's okay, cousin. We'll handle the sheriff. Just sign these papers to transfer the estate management to the church. It's for the best." Terrell reached for the pen, but as he leaned forward, he saw Grady's reflection in the polished glass of the desk. Grady wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at the basement door behind Terrell, and he was making a hush sign to someone standing in the shadows. Terrell paused. He smelled something. It wasn't bleach this time. It was the smell of burning copper. He didn't sign. Instead, he dropped the pen and stood up. "I left my glasses in the car," Terrell said coldly. He walked toward the front door, but he didn't go to the car. He circled around the back of the house, toward the small basement window Brenda had mentioned. He knelt in the dirt and peered through the grime-covered glass. His heart stopped. Inside the dark basement, he didn't see medical equipment. He saw a row of old, iron filing cabinets, and on top of them sat a small, wooden box with his father's initials. The box was open. Inside, Terrell saw a stack of passports. All of them had different names, but every single one featured the same face, Grady. Terrell pulled back from the basement window, his knees sinking into the wet mud. His mind raced. The passports. The different names. Grady wasn't just a greedy cousin. He was a man with a dozen identities, but then, a sharp voice shattered the silence. Searching for more ghosts, Terrell. It was Brenda. She was standing by the porch steps, clutching a kitchen knife so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked terrified, but not of Terrell. She was looking at the house. "Go away, Terrell," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Sign the papers and leave. If you stay, nobody wins. Not even her." Terrell's anger boiled over. He didn't see the fear in her eyes anymore. He only saw the deception. He stepped toward her, his shadow towering over her small frame. "You've been in on this from the start, haven't you? The bruises, the whispers. It's all a show to get more of my money." He reached out and snatched the knife from her weak grip, flinging it into the grass. "I sent millions. I trusted you with her life. And you used it to buy marble floors while my mother, or whoever that woman is, rots in a cold room." Brenda fell to her knees, sobbing. "You don't understand, Grady. He has the letters. He has everything." "I don't want to hear it," Terrell roared. He turned and marched back toward the front of the house. He saw Marcus, the boy from the cemetery, standing by the gate. "Get out of here, kid," Terrell yelled, his voice filled with a bitterness he had never felt before. "Tell whoever sent you that the game is over. I'm done being the village fool." The boy flinched and ran, dropping a small, silver object in the dirt. Terrell didn't bother to look. He stormed into the living room where Grady and the pastor were still waiting. Terrell grabbed the pen and slammed it onto the desk. "Fine. You want the estate, take it. I'm leaving this cursed place tonight. But know this, Grady, I'm cutting off every cent, the church, the clinic, the house. It all stops now." Grady's face didn't pale. He actually smiled. He picked up the signed paper and blew on the ink to dry it. "Thank you, Terrell. You've made the right choice for everyone." As Terrell turned to leave, he heard a heavy metallic thud from the basement. It was followed by a scream. Not a woman's scream. It was the voice of a man, muffled and desperate, coming from beneath the floorboards. Terrell stopped at the door, his hand on the brass knob. He looked back at Grady's. Grady's smile was gone. He was looking at the basement door with a look of pure raw horror. Someone was kicking the door from the inside, and they were calling Terrell's name, not Malik, Terrell. "Terrell, don't leave. He's not Grady." The voice was identical to the one on the phone 20 years ago. The voice that told him his mother was dead. If that was the real Grady in the basement, then who was standing at the desk? The man at the desk lunged for the basement door, but Terrell was faster. He shoved the heavy mahogany table aside, the crystal vases shattering against the marble floor. Terrell reached the basement latch and pulled. It was locked from the outside. "Terrell, help me," the voice screamed again. It was raw and terrified. The man Terrell thought was his cousin grabbed Terrell's collar, his face twisting into a mask of pure malice. "Don't touch that door, Terrell. You signed the papers. You gave it all away. Now get out." The pastor and the elders didn't move. They stood like statues, their faces cold and indifferent. Terrell realized then that the entire village wasn't just complicit, they were under this man's thumb. "Who are you?" Terrell hissed, his chest heaving. The man didn't answer. He signaled to the large men standing by the entrance. They moved in. Grabbing Terrell by the arms, he fought, kicking and screaming, but they were too strong. They dragged him toward the front door, his expensive shoes scuffing against the floor he had paid for. They threw him out onto the porch. The rain was pouring now, soaking through his suit in seconds. Grady, or the man pretending to be him, stepped out and tossed Terrell's leather bag into the mud. "You're a stranger here now, billionaire." The man sneered. "Go back to your glass towers. This village belongs to me." The heavy oak doors slammed shut. Terrell heard the iron bolts slide into place. He was locked out. His mother was trapped inside with a monster. His real cousin was dying in a basement. And the village he tried to save had turned its back on him. Terrell sat in the mud, his head bowed. He looked at the silver object Marcus had dropped earlier. He picked it up. It wasn't a toy. It was a heavy, old-fashioned key with a small tag attached. On the tag, in his mother's shaky handwriting, were 3 words: the old church. Terrell looked up at the darkened house. He had no money here, no power, no friends. But as he gripped the key, he saw a light flicker in the woods. It was a signal. Someone else was waiting in the dark. Someone who knew exactly who the man in the house really was. Terrell scrambled through the wet brush, following the flicker of light. He reached a small clearing behind the rusted gates of the old church. A figure stood there, draped in a heavy rain poncho. As Terrell approached, the person lowered their hood. It was the old woman from the laundry tub, the one with the curved spine and the bruised arms. "You shouldn't have come back, Terrell," she said, her voice gravelly but sharp. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. She handed it to him. Terrell wiped the rain from the plastic frame. His breath hitched. The photo showed two young men standing in front of this very church 20 years ago. One was clearly the real Grady, thin smiling, with a distinctive birthmark on his neck. The other man standing next to him made Terrell's blood turn to ice. It was the man currently sitting in his house. But in the photo, he was wearing a prison uniform. "His name is Elias," the woman whispered. "He was Grady's cellmate. Grady was a fool. He told Elias everything. About the billionaire cousin in New York. About the monthly checks. About the mother who was starting to lose her sight." Terrell gripped the photo so hard it cracked. "Where is my cousin? Who is in that basement?" "The real Grady is down there," she replied, looking toward the mansion. "Elias came here 15 years ago. He moved in, claimed he was Grady, and everyone believed him because he had the money. He kept your mother blind and trapped so she could never tell the difference." Terrell felt a sick shiver. "And the funeral, the graves." The old woman looked toward the cemetery. "That grave is empty, Terrell. It's a box of stones." Elias needed a death certificate to stop people from asking why Lucille was never seen at church. He paid the old doctor to sign it, but he couldn't bring himself to kill her yet. He needed her alive to keep the trust fund active. She stepped closer, her eyes burning with a sudden intensity. "But there is something Elias doesn't know. Something your mother hid in the altar of this church the night he arrived." Terrell looked at the heavy silver key in his hand. "The old church." He turned toward the rotted wooden doors. But as he pushed them open, he heard the sound of a car engine screaming through the mud. Headlights cut through the darkness, pinning Terrell against the church doors. It was the limousine. The door opened, and Elias stepped out. He wasn't wearing his suit anymore. He was holding a gasoline can and a flare. "The truth is a heavy thing, Terrell," Elias shouted over the rain. "It's time to burn the evidence." Terrell looked at the key, then at the fire in the man's hand. He realized the note his mother left wasn't just a warning. It was a map to the one thing that could destroy Elias forever. But Elias wasn't looking at Terrell. He was looking at the church roof. Someone was standing on the bell tower, holding a heavy iron bell. A shadow moved in the dark. It was Marcus. And he wasn't alone. Terrell stood paralyzed as the flare hissed in Elias' hand. The red glow illuminated the gasoline puddles spreading across the church steps. Terrell looked at the silver key, then at the man who had stolen 15 years of his family's life. "I believed you," Terrell whispered, his voice thick with a sudden, agonizing shame. "I sent the money that built her prison. I paid for the locks on her door." He looked up at the bell tower. Marcus wasn't alone. Standing beside the boy was Brenda. She wasn't crying anymore. She held a heavy rope in her hands. With a sharp tug, the massive iron bell swung, a deafening, rhythmic tolling shattered the silence of the village. Clang, clang, clang. It was the old signal. The emergency call for the deacons and the men of the village that hadn't been used since the Great Fire. Elias snarled, stepping toward the wooden doors. "It's too late for a prayer." Terrell, he tossed the flare. Terrell didn't run away. He lunged forward, stripping off his ruined designer jacket. He used the expensive fabric to smother the flare before it hit the gasoline. He scrambled on his knees, ignoring the heat searing his palms. "I'm not leaving her again," Terrell roared. He shoved the silver key into the altar's hidden lock. The wood groaned and shifted. A small, velvet-lined compartment popped open. Inside wasn't money or gold. It was a stack of voice recorder tapes and a notarized confession signed by the old doctor before he died. Terrell grabbed the tapes, his heart racing. He looked at Elias, who was now fumbling with a second flare. But lights were appearing in the distance. Dozens of them. The villagers were coming, led by Marcus and the sound of the bell. Terrell turned to the old woman. "Get Marcus and Brenda to the house. I'll handle the crowd." "No," the woman said, pointing at the tapes. "Elias isn't the only one you should be worried about. Look at the date on that confession, Terrell." Terrell glanced down. The date was yesterday. The doctor hadn't died years ago. He was alive. And if the doctor was alive, then whose body was actually in the basement? Terrell heard a wet, dragging sound coming from the back of the church. A shadow emerged from the vestry, dripping with mud and holding a jagged piece of glass. It wasn't a man. It was someone Terrell had seen mourning at the cemetery earlier that day. D letter 1B0 letter 1EDB, I de la N letter 1ED9, I dung part 12. Hand distroke letter 1E9 and G, C letter 1E9, U van distroke letter 1B0 letter 1E3, CV I letter 1EBF, T B letter 1EB1 and G, T I letter 1EBF and GN. Bomb sock cock K letter 1EF9, T H U letter 1EAD, T G I letter 1EF, Chanva and H letter 1ECBP, distroke letter 1ED9, K letter 1ECBCH, B letter 1EA3N drama, distroke letter 1EA1 Oli. Terrell turned around, his heart hammering against his ribs. The shadow emerging from the vestry was the woman in the black mourning veil he had seen at the cemetery. But she wasn't grieving anymore. Her eyes burned with a cold, sharp madness. "Who are you?" Terrell shouted, clutching the voice recorder tapes to his chest. The woman didn't answer. She stared at Elias, who stood frozen with the gasoline can. "He can't burn it, Terrell," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping together. "Because if he burns this church, he burns the child." Terrell froze. The child. Maya was in the attic. Who else was there? Elias let out a guttural roar and lunged at Terrell, the second flare hissing. But Terrell didn't flinch. He wasn't the soft billionaire anymore. He tackled Elias, their bodies slamming onto the dusty wooden floor. Terrell used every ounce of his strength to pin Elias' wrists, ignoring the searing heat of the flare near his face. "Brenda, Marcus. Run," Terrell bellowed. Suddenly, the church doors burst open. A crowd of villagers flooded in, led by the sheriff Terrell had seen earlier. But instead of arresting Elias, the sheriff pulled his service weapon and aimed it directly at Terrell's head. "Drop the tapes, Terrell," the sheriff ordered, his voice flat. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." Terrell felt a cold wave of realization. The entire power structure of the village was bought and paid for. He looked at the villagers. They held torches and heavy sticks, but their faces weren't full of help. They were full of hunger and hate. The woman in the mourning veil let out a chilling, high-pitched laugh. She pointed at the wall behind the altar. "Open it, Terrell. The truth isn't in the tapes. It's beneath our feet." Terrell glanced at the small gap under the altar he had just pried open. There was a tiny, hidden passage leading deep underground. From below, a sound rose that made everyone in the church freeze. It was the cry of a newborn baby. A baby Terrell never knew existed. "Who is that?" Elias, Terrell growled, still pinning the conman down. Elias smirked, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. "That's why your mother never left this village, Terrell. That is her final secret." Terrell looked at the dark hatch. He had to choose. Keep the evidence to put Elias away, or dive into the dark to save a life. But as he moved, a thin, bony hand gripped his shoulder. It was Mama Lucille. She had escaped the house and stood there, her sightless eyes fixed on the altar. "Don't go down there, Malik," she whispered. "It's a trap." Terrell felt his mother's cold fingers dig into his skin. "A trap," he gasped. Mama Lucille nodded toward the sheriff. "The baby isn't down there, Malik. It's a recording. They want you in the hole so they can bury the truth with you." The sheriff's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, A loud siren wailed from the road. Not the local police. State troopers. Marcus had used the silver key to open the old church's emergency radio tower, bypassing the local lines. Elias tried to scramble away, but the villagers, the ones Elias had been tithing with Terrell's own money, suddenly turned. Seeing the state troopers, their fear of Elias vanished. They swarmed him, pinning the monster to the dusty floor. Terrell ignored the chaos. He swept Mama Lucille into his arms, weeping into her silver hair. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I should have come back sooner." She touched his face with trembling hands. "You're here now, Malik. That's all that matters." The state troopers handcuffed Elias and the sheriff. They dragged them out past the empty grave. The fake mourning woman vanished into the shadows of the woods, leaving behind a single, blood-stained locket on the altar. Terrell took his mother to the city the next morning. He didn't burn the house. He turned it into a shelter for the village's elderly, named after Mama Lucille. He sat with her on his balcony, overlooking the New York skyline. For the first time in 20 years, she was safe. But as Terrell helped her into her chair, he noticed her clutching a small, leather-bound diary he had never seen before. She handed it to him, her sightless eyes filled with a new kind of dread. "Read the last page, Malik," she whispered. Elias wasn't working alone. He was receiving orders from a bank in New York. Terrell opened the diary. His heart stopped. The signature at the bottom of the monthly instruction letters was a name he saw every day in his own boardroom. The nightmare in the village was over, but the real war had just moved to his office. Who was the man in the suit behind the letters? And why did he want Mama Lucille dead? If you were Terrell, would you trust your partners tomorrow? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for walking this path with us.